Let's cross to the Sydney CBD now and catch up with Shane Fitzsimmons. You will have known him over this summer in particular as the Chief Commissioner of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service. He now heads up as the Commissioner of Resilience New South Wales. He's had his feet under the desk for a couple of weeks now. Thanks for joining us, Shane. I appreciate it, and congratulations on that new gig.
Good afternoon, Chris. That's right. I've been in the gig now just on a week, actually, so settling in, lots to absorb, lots to learn, but really looking forward to continuing to help the people in New South Wales.
Yeah, just tell us firstly about the concept of being a Commissioner for Resilience, because I would have thought that government agencies, whether they be the Environment Department, the Police Department, whether they're the Education and Health Department, they would always be looking at risk assessments and risk management, preparing for the threats that might befall the state and the nation. What is your role to do? What's your role? Is it to coordinate those efforts or to try and think about risks that perhaps no one's considered?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think you've summarised it pretty well there, Chris. So it's a fairly broad remit to have a look at planning and contemplating the sorts of disruptions, the emergencies, the disasters that can have an impact on the people of New South Wales, and right across government. And remembering Resilience New South Wales is a new agency that's been put into Premier and Cabinet. So it's looking across all of government, across the community, across industry, across the business sector, the non-government organisations. How do we all work together to better plan for and contemplate major disasters or emergencies, help prevent and mitigate the impacts of those disasters and disruptions? Obviously, we've got to respond to them, but most importantly, it's about recovery and rebounding. And the three biggest priorities in taking on this role right from the outset, because of the season we've had, is recovery, 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 and particularly our bushfire-affected communities, but also those that have been crippled by the drought. We're also then affected by the bushfires. In some areas we had storm and floods, and now we're all affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So there's an enormous amount of work to do with the recovery and rebounding from all of those disasters and the compounding effect of those disasters, and making sure those that need the assistance are getting the assistance. We saw an unprecedented fire season, and that's been matched with unparalleled support, a range of programs and subsidies and assistance to people that are in need, and we've got to make sure it's getting to those people in need.
There are more announcements made today about bushfire recovery, but have you been frustrated or disappointed with the ability to deliver post-fire relief to communities in New South Wales at least?
In my first week, Chris, I've been pretty impressed with just how much has been going on around the state, and some of the things that come to mind is just in the $10,000 grants alone, over $150 million has been distributed across New South Wales. Last week, we just saw more than 1,000 residential home blocks have been cleared under the contractual arrangements with Lang O'Rourke and all the local contractors at the community level that are getting in and helping people clear their blocks so they can start making decisions about rebuilding and a new home. And that program is now factoring in somewhere around about 250 to 300 blocks are scheduled to be cleared per week as we head between now and the middle of the year, and the objective was to try and see that done at the end of the year. The end of last week, I was also down in the southern area. I popped into the community of Cobargo again to catch up with people. The relief centre is still going really well. There's a wonderful dedicated group of people. But we also saw the delivery of one of our pods, the partnership we've done with the Minderoo Foundation, more than 100 pods notionally allocated here to New South Wales. We've already seen something like 24, 25 delivered across the state, principally in the region north area affected by fires, and there's now dozens of those scheduled to roll out down through the south. So it might not be getting the publicity, it might not be getting the airing that it ought to be getting, but there's a tremendous amount of work going on the ground to people that need it most. Wonderful coordination with local government and local community-led efforts. Of course, we're very keen to hear if anyone is slipping through the cracks, then we want to know about them so we can make sure they're getting the support and the assistance they need.
When we talk about community resilience and government resilience, when we talk about being prepared for disasters, you've just had the worst bushfire season that New South Wales has seen in terms of damage to property, loss of life. Does that not say that the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, among other agencies, was not sufficiently well prepared for this bad bushfire season?
Look, as the former Commissioner of the Rural Fire Service, I don't think the Rural Fire Service and its partner firefighting agencies and all the emergency service of government could have been better prepared in terms of resourcing and equipment. We've never had those sorts of levels. But we also saw an unparalleled and unprecedented level of response and assistance from our interstate colleagues, with over 6,000 personnel coming in from interstate, every state and territory. We also had United States, Canada and New Zealand. So what was extraordinary about the last season was its unprecedented nature. Now, I am cautious, or I do caution those that say last season is the new norm. I don't believe that. But what I do believe, it's a signal about what the new extreme might be. So there'll be plenty of lessons coming out of this last season, Chris, and we need to take those on board, and we need to plan and resource and configure ourselves going forward if this is likely to be the new extreme. What I would also say is, the losses, as terrible and as tragic as they were, and I don't mean to be insensitive or disrespectful to anybody who lost loved ones or lost everything, those losses would have been considerably greater if we hadn't learnt the lessons from the last decade. And what I mean by that is the investment in public information and warnings, the use of technology to get timely and accurate information from the field and then broadcast out in the form of public information and warnings. Early analysis indicates that as tragic as the death toll at 25, 26 was, that should have been up to around 150 or 200 had we not been able to exercise and put into place the lessons of the past. And I expect lots of lessons to come out of this season and help us improve into the years ahead as well.
Shane Fitzsimmons, I agree with you. I've got nothing but respect for you and your officers, professional and volunteer, for the efforts they put in, the lives they saved, and what you say about resourcing being adequate in terms of preparations. But you know, of course, that where you get to drought conditions in New South Wales, you'll face conditions like that. We have in the past, we will in the future. And it's about town planning arrangements to have adequate fire breaks around small towns. It's about the town planning arrangements so that houses have to have cleared space around them. It's about the prescribed burns to reduce fuel loads in forests and national parks. When you look at all of that preparation, obviously New South Wales allowed itself to be more vulnerable than it should have. And does the RFS bear any of that responsibility for either not advising government sufficiently or not doing enough itself?
Look, I think it's fair to say, Chris, New South Wales led the way in Australia when it comes to bushfire-prone land planning and conditioning of new development, of extensions and modifications. We embarked on that program in the early 2000s. It was around 2002, 2003, where anyone planning to build or extend or modify in bushland environments are the subject of conditions and planning considerations and construction standards. Now, that's been very unpopular. But the reality is, if we want to start building more resilient communities into the future, they're the sorts of things that we need to do more of. Unfortunately, a lot of buildings, a lot of infrastructure that's been lost as a result of the last season's unprecedented fire conditions were legacy developments and legacy infrastructure that certainly predates that sort of planning, that sort of conditioning on development. But you're right, more of that sort of stuff has got to occur into the future. We know every year we try and get more and more hazard reduction done and prescribed burning done and other mechanical mitigation activities completed, but principally weather impedes our ability to do that. And then in more recent years, we're heavily criticised when we're trying to do that really important work because a byproduct of hazard reduction burning is smoke, and then smoke becomes a pollutant, becomes a health issue, those sorts of things. So there are very many competing demands, and it's important as communities, and I mean communities far and wide, that we have these discussions, that we socialise these issues to ensure that we understand the implications of being more aggressive or less aggressive in any of these aspects, because there are flow-on effects. And if we're not willing to do one, then what is it we're going to do to compensate, to help build more resilient communities, to better prepare for, withstand the impact of, and recover from major disruptions like bushfires?
Bottom line, Shane Fitzsimmons, is that people need to understand, don't they, that in bushfire-prone areas you've got to have adequate separation between housing and bushland, because nobody with all the will and all the resources in the world can stop an Australian bushfire in the worst of conditions.
Well, and we saw that this year, Chris, and look, what we've got to be mindful of is it's quite seasonal. So the drought's been with us now for several years. And the last season, we saw the awful results of the fire season. But the same outlook, a very similar outlook, was for the season before as well. But we just got enough weather disruption. You're 100% right. People that are living in bushfire-prone areas ought not to be surprised when they're impacted by bushfires. And our research shows over and over again, even people in the highest risk areas, very few people actually personalise that risk. And then actually go and do the meaningful things around their property, adjacent to their property, to help it better withstand the impact of fire and be better prepared in the impact of fire, but also having a bushfire survival plan, a conversation with the family and the loved ones, knowing what they're going to do before a fire impacts and certainly as a fire impacts. So all those sorts of things together, community education, understanding, personalising risk, doing something about that risk, better planning and setting developments and sprawl into bushfire-prone areas, all those sorts of planning and conditions on top of mitigation treatments, hazard reduction burning, mechanical works, cleared breaks, fire trails, all those sorts of things need to be ongoing as a priority program to help us prepare for the seasons ahead. And I know the Rural Fire Service and the fire agencies and land management agencies are trying to take advantage of weather conditions right now to get a lot of that really important work underway ahead of the next fire season.